Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis, the Braves of Folly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Telegram, Twitter, and Facebook. And you can support the channel on Subscribestar Locals and Buy Me a Coffee. Now, today's episode, while we wait for some people to come in, is sort of an experiment in merging two things that I've been, in the last couple of years talking a lot about. One, psychological warfare, and two, certain elements of the way the system is really set up in favor of private interests, capital, and how, capital is behind everything, even the Soviet Union, which is strange, but I've already gone over that, so I won't do that here. But what happens when you marry the idea of psychological warfare with the principles of labor struggle? And can you do something with that will be interesting? And I think you can. So tonight's episode is an experiment in showing what kind of ideas you can come up with while doing this. So without much further ado, here we begin. Psychic strike. As someone who has studied both psychological warfare and labor action, the incorporation of the two into a shared body of work on struggle is a natural application of the two fields. To break down the title, psychic pertains to psychological warfare broadly, and the mind of a single person more narrowly. The strike portion of the title has to do with the concept of a labor strike and integrating psychological warfare into the framework. Basic idea here is simple. While a strike is generally seen as an attack on a factory or a business owner's control or access to the facility by organizing the laborers to form a picket line to prevent the factory from being used, one can look at the same principles and direct them to the employer's mind. So instead of denying him access to his capital for the purposes of denying him the profits therein, you are denying him some aspect of his mind which directly targets his ability to act, plan, and think, degrading his overall performance. Let us imagine a small town in the U.S. Any small town will do. The characteristic feature of most small towns in America is that the richest man or richest men end up running everything, aka an oligarchy. Formerly, they own legacy business, which has often employed many people in the town. They own property, aka physical space. They have friends in the government, and formerly they have friends in the business community. Though through a carefully curated public image, he is often seen as a moral exemplar in the town, and through a complex web of debts and frauds, holds many in the town under his thumb. Yet he is weak, very weak, at one crucial point: his mind. Three mental processes make this control possible: insider knowledge on how the economy works, a sense of moral superiority, and the complex process of juggling all the contradicting narratives in his head, which are necessary to enforce the informal control grid. He has two faces: the swaggering bully, often seen on the workplace, and the smiling, smarmy man about town in private life. Both personas rest upon a certain self-image that he curates in his own mind. This is the weak link in the chainmail suit. Because he has so much money, he exists in a different world than his employees and even those he does business with in the town. Because of this fact, he often, even in private life, acts like the swaggering bully he is on the job. He knows, even if he is thoughtless and careless and inadvertently hurts people by his actions, they have limited abilities to compel him to stop. You might voice your disapproval or complain to certain persons, but at the end of the day, even already established members of the town have little recourse but to accept this state of affairs. Now, here I have pulled back the curtain that hides this reality. What is the curtain? The curtain is the simulacra of polite society with all its niceties and insincere behaviors. See, the game is simple. Everybody has to put on an act, a front, and pretend to be polite, friendly, sincere, and earnest people who are highly motivated, and through a complex array of social games, translate all their actions, be they economic, romantic, educational, or blatantly self-interested, as some acceptable stock category within this smothering prison of enforced politeness. One thing you are never supposed to do in this context is act in a blatantly self-interested way. That could either be out of personal selfishness or economic gain. Since everybody says they don't act out of either, it is bad taste to probe too deeply for the truth everybody knows is there. After all, this is more of an open secret than anything else. The smarmy men about town persona masters this reality and every single foul, underhanded economic play he makes is always cast in terms that are acceptable to this framework. I mean, a good example would be somebody who employs foreign labor under the table, rather than saying, I'm trying to undermine, the bargaining power of the workers in my town, and that the people are, getting wise and want to lobby politicians to restrict immigration access. The people that I work with feel frightened due to nativist tendencies. This is the language they use. It's just so despicable. For our purposes, one specific scenario will garner our attention. The I didn't mean to scenario. Imagine two boys, Clyde and Dennis, playing, and then one hurts the other. For further clarity, Clyde is a spoiled brat who thinks he can get away with things because his father's a big man in town and will at times come to his aid. Dennis is just your run-of-the-mill boy with parents who are not particularly well connected. Clyde hurts Dennis, admittedly not intentionally. He is just careless, like his father. Dennis says, "That hurts." Clyde then says, "I didn't mean to hurt you. Don't get mad at me." Clyde then proceeds to do the thing again. Dennis then gets really mad and clobbers Clyde, who, being a bully and a coward at heart, cries like a baby. Now Dennis is the villain because he broke the unspoken code of taking the affront personally and striking back. You see, in the United States, an incredibly stupid notion has taken root that in non-legal disputes, effects don't matter. Clyde might say, "You know that I didn't mean to hurt you. It wasn't my intent." Then, asked to stop, Clyde says, "I won't stop. You just have to get out of the way." This is like saying if a man shooting a gun down range for target practice, but he takes no precaution for his environment and accidentally shoots a bystander who walks through his line of fire, the fact that the bystander was hurt or killed does not in any way reflect negatively on the shooter. I mean, hey, the bystander should have looked where he was going. This reflects the outsized impact these men placed in a hierarchy of the capitalist system to harm others even unintentionally. This is why Clyde or Clyde's father's injunction to not take the perceived affront personally and let it go and totally alter your way of life to avoid being inadvertently harmed, again, is tyrannical. The power they wield is disproportionate and cannot be escaped as it exists all across this country. Over time, most people learn to accept this reality and adjust accordingly. How does all this connect to psychological warfare and strikes, you might ask? Well, let's return to the tripartite base of the man's mind: insider knowledge of the economy, sense of moral superiority, and complex web of plots and plans he uses to control people. We see his weakest link as his self-image. This is the target. The swaggering bully is a conceited fool who thinks his will ought to be obeyed in all cases, says this is good for the bottom line, and that because of this, he is morally justified in being a swaggering bully against everyone. The smarmy man about town is also built on the self-image of being a noble benefactor of the town and is quote-unquote deeply hurt when anyone suggests he is acting in a self-interested fashion or at the expense of others, as if his quote-unquote being hurt has anything to do with the real pain he inflicts with his class war on the people of this town. With this is also usually associated a conceit that he is the cleverest man in town, so clever that no one can ever penetrate his plans. His fear of being quote-unquote hurt is where we shall focus. One can easily imagine a scenario in the town in which, in a totally private, non-workplace setting, this man is debating some issue with the local autist. Let's say this is the same Clyde and Dennis. Both are adults in their 30s. Clyde is well on his way to replace his father as the swaggering bully and smarmy man about town. After all, he was on the inside track and didn't have to lift a finger to get ahead. Dennis is a high-functioning autist and struggling. Dennis is highly competitive and loves to debate, and more than that, loves to win debates. Clyde, being none too bright, loses debates, but always seems to get baited by Dennis. Almost like he's working an angle. Almost. Once this debate has been initiated, Clyde starts to lose, and this loss of face will fatally undermine his carefully curated sense of self as the cleverest man in town, if not the world. Conceit knows no bounds. Then, with the force of his convictions, Dennis drops a truth bomb on Clyde, which hurts. I mean, it really hurts. Clyde cannot admit defeat, especially as he knows Dennis will demand he alter his way of life to live in accordance with that truth, a way of life that works quite well for him. So Clyde then does something despicable. He refuses to yield on the grounds of reason and invokes the red herring of practicality and some nonsense about a political platform he is strongly invested in. Like, again, I stand against nativist tendencies. Okay, so you exploit foreign workers in order to depress wages at home. That's what you're doing. This has nothing to do about nativist tendencies. This is how these people think. Notice what Clyde is doing here. He is allowing himself to be motivated by money, gain, and the economy on an issue in which reason alone should be the arbiter. He denies this, of course, but Dennis knows Clyde is not being sincere about his intentions. In fact, Clyde, in desperation, pointed to the fact that he is more financially successful than Dennis. A red herring if ever there was one. Dennis might or might not guess at the true reason, not practicality, not politics, but Clyde's bottom line. He then gets even more righteously indignant and says the truth with more force and conviction. Now things get interesting. Clyde claims Dennis has quote-unquote hurt his feelings. Dennis then says he didn't mean to, and Clyde should grow up. Clyde, being a sham hypocrite and totally ignoring that he has done this to Dennis his entire life, gets offended, sulks, pouts, and turns the town once again against Dennis. This next step in this drama is the townspeople telling Dennis that Clyde is hurt and upset. He should apologize to Clyde. Dennis says Clyde cannot take his own medicine, and then everybody in the town takes the metaphorical 2 steps back. But Dennis has learned something important. The gods bleed, and Clyde has been really hurt. His internal equilibrium is damaged. Such a thing has never happened before. And if Dennis maintains his position, then Clyde will stop associating with him, as this defeat should not have been possible. And as they say, out of sight, out of mind, it didn't happen. The townspeople turn against Dennis too, though with varying levels of hostility. Dennis now possesses something that Clyde wants, even needs. What has happened is a breach in the simulacra of niceness that maintains the social life of this small American town. This can and often does happen in other ways too. For example, acting thoughtlessly from his position of class privilege, Clyde might behave in such a way that Dennis is offended, and of course, no satisfaction is necessary as Dennis is not on the same plane as Clyde. So Dennis, you better know when to pack it up. This is called social cathartic release. By social, I mean this is one of the set of actions or behaviors within a given social system. By cathartic release, I mean the relief from the release of pent-up emotions, in this case being quote-unquote hurt. The game being played here is the very real material and social harm that Clyde's actions have on Dennis are trivialized and reduced to the same level of inconvenience as Clyde's feeling being hurt by Dennis. This is, of course, ridiculous, as the tangible harm being done to Dennis is not accounted for by the system. By withholding social cathartic release, Dennis is able to hold something of great value, even for Clyde. That, on withholding, will be a splinter in Clyde's mind over the years, undermine his sense of self, and more importantly, his self-confidence. In the immediate aftermath of this social breach, Clyde will be addled and agitated. He will complain about how Dennis's actions, quote-unquote, bother him, and impact his daily decision-making. This can be quantified as some non-trivial degradation of Clyde's mental performance and wound to his ego. While all of this is clearly psychological warfare, how does the notion of a strike fit into this? Firstly, Dennis, insofar as he withholds social cathartic release, is on strike. He's maintaining the breach in social affairs, or at least is perceived to be doing so. The reality is the breach already existed. Clyde was using his class privilege to violate the terms of the social contract without being punished. Dennis is just reifying and demarcating this reality. This is a big no-no. In a word, Dennis is on strike. He is refusing to provide the social catharsis until or unless Clyde makes some restitution. As Clyde is under no requirement to do so, and Dennis is intransigent, a permanent rift is developed in the community. This behavior by Dennis is punished by everyone in the community, for if other people get it into their heads to do just what Dennis did, not only with Clyde, but other wealthy individuals in the community, a series of psychic rifts will emerge that threaten to undo the entirely crafted simulacra of suburban life. This weaponization of cathartic release was a key element of the woke psychological operations, and is a major reason why now communities all across the country are in tatters. We can blame the woke, but really the woke just pointed out what was already there. If Dennis were able to get other individuals within the community to go on strike in the same way he does, upon a certain critical mass, which is dependent on a variety of contingent circumstances, enough people could exert psychic pressure on the business owners, landowners, and overall leaders in the community so that their ability to act is so degraded they cannot act. What do I mean by this? If, for example, Clyde feels quote-unquote hurt, not just by Dennis, but everyone he has dealings with, he will be in such a psychological state that he cannot function optimally. He will falter, fail, and fall. The community in this case would be denying him a minimum level of mental well-being to operate. We all know that an otherwise talented and competent man, which of course Clyde is not, under some great emotional or psychological distress or pressure, such as anger, pain, doubt, or fear, is severely compromising his activity. The goal then is to leverage this as the weaker party and withhold what is necessary for the more powerful party to act. If enough people do this, the man is unable to act, as the mental strain is so great for concerted planned action, he's unable to do it, or at least do it well. This is where the strike part comes in. A successful strike shuts down a factory, thereby denying the owner revenue. A mental strike, by withholding social cathartic release, shuts down the owner's ability to act, or more specifically, some part of the owner's mind. That part that you have a direct connection to because, quote unquote, you've hurt him, or whatever that's supposed to mean. This is superior to a normal strike for a variety of reasons. The picket line is invisible and cannot be breached by strike breakers. You can keep this going indefinitely. The factory owner can, in theory, close down the factory and move it somewhere else, negating the power of a strike. In our current case, he cannot shut down his mind and move it to another place. He has only one mind. He must keep it running. The pressure that could, in theory, be applied would be crippling. And see, this is why it's better than a regular strike, because you can't move the mind like a factory. You only got one. You got to keep it. You got to keep it going. One major requirement for this to be done successfully is to remain below the threshold of escalation. What do I mean by this? Simple. Do not act in a way that would give him or others grounds to seriously harm you. For example, in the social niceties of discourse of the day, you can act like a bore and be offensive up to a certain point and still be included, at least informally, in the social order. They might say, well, Dennis is just that way, or, well, Dennis is just being Dennis, or, why can't Dennis just learn to compromise? This annoys and bothers people, but if done in the right way, it doesn't lead to catastrophic retaliation. Avoiding catastrophic retaliation can further be improved by encouraging and instructing more and more people to engage in this kind of behavior, as it puts pressure on those who might wish to retaliate. If this behavior is not only kept below the threshold of escalation, but also inhabits the shadow realm of, quote unquote, this doesn't exist, or, quote unquote, this can't happen, then you really are golden. And by this, I mean the Clydes in our life always say, well, that is not so bad, you can handle this, or suck it up, buttercup, or I deal with this all the time, when they're responding to some complaint about what's going on in your life. In reality, he doesn't. For any variety of reasons, he fails to see that he is very vulnerable, and if you can strike at him here, he is defenseless. Why? Because he cannot admit it is happening. He just told you the pain of X isn't that bad. If he acts like it hurts, you checkmated him hard. He also implicitly believes you cannot do it to him, and if he admits you did, a little bit of his self-assurance crumbles. If we look at all of this symbolically, by withholding social cathartic release, you are agitating his mind, which introduces a measurable degradation of his physical performance. If you get others to do, the force is amplified in a way corresponding to the number of people involved. Unlike a factory that can be picked up and moved, his mind is one of a kind, and he cannot leave his own inner thoughts. The strike is inescapable. As long as the person involved refused to give him social cathartic release, each individual can be treated as a grain of sand in the gears of the machine. Enough grains and the machine cannot work. It's degraded. One of two things is likely to happen if this pressure is kept up. Either Clyde breaks and gives in to the demands, or Clyde, in resisting the pressure, becomes so degraded in his ability to act coherently, he becomes a non-issue. So in the first case, you get what you want. You win. The second case, you don't necessarily get what you want, but you get him so reduced in his ability to do anything that the next stage in your plan can be implemented to get you what you want. A major reason why this works is because everybody in the U.S. pretends to be on equal footing. We are all equal. I am just like you. This is part of the price of engaging in the social sphere, and it's in some sense conditioned by things like social media, where a lowly chud can strike at the heart of a politician or actor. The fact that Clyde's actions have a greater impact due to his wealth and privilege cannot be admitted to in order to keep up this charade. And he's just like me, right? Since he cannot admit this to himself, you can inhabit the gray zone and launch salvo after salvo, and he will just have to eat it because it's not happening, right? What does this look like? Imagine Clyde saying, after being asked by Dennis to demand reasons why he should comply with the ultimatum just received, "You know, Dennis, I would like it if you just did this thing for me." Think of the guy from Office Space. Let's see. After all, it's just a little thing. It doesn't cost you anything. Death by 1,000 paper cuts aside, Dennis then turns the table on Clyde by saying, "Well, you see, Clyde, I would like to do this littlest of thing for you. But you see, I have a similar request. I have this very little thing I would like you to do first." Of course, Clyde will refuse, and then Dennis in turn refuses on the same grounds as Clyde. This totally subverts and upsets the unequal class dynamic here, and Clyde cannot make a direct appeal to it or he will unmask himself. In summary, by integrating the principles of psychological warfare and labor action, you as an individual can lead by example and target the minds of those higher up in the class structure than yourself by refusing to give social cathartic release. This functions as a grain of sand, degrading his mental operations and by extension his physical operations through thought precedes action. As others join your cause, this effect becomes overwhelming, in fact, irresistible. This is, of course, why the United States withdrew from Afghanistan and Vietnam. It's a much larger scale, and that includes military action, but it's the same basic principle. You put enough pressure on the right people, and they'll do what you want. By directly striking at his mind through a social strike, you cripple his ability to act. Unlike a piece of physical capital, which can be sold, moved around, or protected with goons, his mind is non-transferable, and if constant pressure is kept up, will crack. The goal here is to produce a culture of withholding social cathartic release. The result will be gridlock for those who are the target. And from the gridlock, you either win or achieve the conditions under which you can win. So it depends on various different things. Seamus O'Blaine, hello, and Craig Mitchell, hello. We have a word for that in Ireland, the gombeen from the Gaelic Gaemaben, the smart joker who has the conceit, as you say, and is corrupt. Nice. Craig Mitchell in Scotland, the word is dickhead. I think you mean an American. These are other elements outside the gombeen paradigm, which is more economic. We will see a day when the different meanings of psychic will draw closer together if spiritual science ever makes a comeback. Well, yeah, I would agree that the kind of man I described can exist outside. He could be a politician. But for the point of this particular discussion, we all know who I'm talking about. This sounds like a sort of stochastic shamanism or judo. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's really good. That's a really good comment you have there. Because the point is you have to strike at the guy from a position not only that he doesn't see coming, but that he has to admit doesn't exist. So back to my point where I said, okay, so let's recast the thing. Let's say you're at work, right? And let's say Clyde is your boss and Dennis is working for him, and Clyde wants him to work overtime. Or do some meaningless favor that's not a part of the contract. And he's like, I would just like it if you did that, right? Obviously, he's leaning on you because he knows that he has a class advantage here. But what you can do to be smart is say, oh, well, it's just a little thing. Okay, well, do this little thing for me first. And you've now elevated yourself to his level, and he has to accept that bluff, because if he doesn't, he then outs himself as a tyrant who's, benefiting from class privilege, which, I suppose he might. But you still win if he does, because if you he's got one of two choices. He either admits that he's doing it, which is mask off, and we all want the mask off, or he has to deny it. Either way, his mental well-being, his sense of self is challenged, threatened. And that's good, because over time, that will degrade this individual. And if we work in the woke, right, obviously they're right for the wrong reasons, in the sense that they attribute all of these nonsense causes to this dynamic that I'm observing. But because that dynamic was there and they roped in all of these interest groups as like a wedge to punch through it, it was already there. It was already there, right? It was just begging for someone to exploit. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person was correct about the matters of fact. Psychological warfare doesn't really matter in that regard. It's just like, hey, whoa, dude, you just left it wide open. Should have. But you see, that's how it is. They have to leave it wide open because they can't admit that it's happening. The other thing I didn't mention, which also directly affects their self-esteem, is they have this real fetish with believing that they earned it, that they did it, rather than being, some spoiled emperor with a silver spoon in his mouth, like, Pu Yi of the Qing dynasty. That's who they really are. But they think that they've done it, like some sort of like, settler on the frontier who built a log cabin and fought off Indians. Yeah, right. You didn't do that. But they think that. They really do. You talk to these people and they all act like they're self-made men who had no help at all. And so again, they just can't admit this. So if you want to like extend this analogy, mental space is a kind of like topography or geography. There's a whole slice of life that this man can't admit is real, but is real. And so if you can identify that geography, that topography, and set up a forward observation base there and start launching drones at him, he's toast. And if enough people do it, he's super toast. And that's what the woke did, right? The woke saw that, and they then started planting all these forward observer bases. And all of these people started launching drones, and it was like, well, they had their own mental issues, and they ultimately self-owned as well, but, they're expendable assets. So it's not like the mission failed. The mission succeeded. And, yeah. So there's a lot here. This is kind of a proof of concept idea. There's a lot more to work on, a lot more to develop. But I think we've had a good feedback from the audience. So, yeah, it's Todd Lewis, Praise the Fly Podcast, signing off.